Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me today. In the fall of 2023, I was doing investigative work on Project 2025, of course, because that's when we sort of got notice of what this was. If a Republican were to enter the White House again, regardless of who it would be, Donald Trump or someone else, this was the plan that they were going to implement in government. So I did special investigative work on it. January 2024, I launched that special report in a 2-part series. Lots of people watched it. It was very engaging. It was very informative. But I also don't think a lot of people took it seriously, that something like this could happen in the United States. And when I started that special report, I started it with the history of this country and how Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States, was involved here in essentially being the first president, the first Republican president that was lobbied by a conservative group to implement such massive destructive changes in the government. And the conservative group that lobbied Ronald Reagan, of course, was the Heritage Foundation and their leaders, of course. And so the Heritage Foundation had a huge impact and control on the Ronald Reagan presidency. And they too also said, you know what, here is our project, 1981 for you, basically. It's going to be called Mandate for Leadership. And I want to play the history part of that special report for you, and they're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. On January 20th, 1981, on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, former actor and governor of California, Ronald Reagan, delivered his inauguration speech as President of the United States. He had won the election in a landslide, completely shellacking his opponent, incumbent Jimmy Carter. Yeah, it was a pretty big win. And in this speech, Reagan said before thousands of people these words.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
A fiery startup to the new presidency, but he was clear on where he stood. Government is the problem. There will be no compromise. No more big government, too invasive. For decades, the conservative machine has run on that theory by Reagan, wanting to reduce the size of government and retain privacy. But in fact, it was a lie. Because behind closed curtains, they were expanding the role in the executive branch for Reagan under his term, under the euphemism of unitary executive. Huh? What does that mean? Exactly. By using a bigger, lesser-known phrase to everyday people, it'd be easier to consolidate power that way. But they don't tell you that, or at least they never will. In fact, they act flabbergasted when you ask them about it or just sinisterly laugh it off behind closed doors.
I don't need you to interpret to me what other people have used.
No.
You're telling
I'm answering
me
your question.
You're telling me you don't know what the unitary theory means.
I don't know what you mean by it, no, Mr.
You don't know what I mean by it.
Anyone else?
Do you know what you mean by it?
I know exactly what I mean by it. And
well, what do you mean?
Sentences.
Tell me.
With absolute executive authority. And I mean absolute.
Shortly after Reagan won the 1980 election, a relatively new conservative think tank group approaches him and gives him 3,000 pages. And what lied in those pages was a 20-volume package on how to swing the government as far as right as possible and how to implement the plan expeditiously. They really were not afraid to tell the new president-elect he wasn't conservative enough. So they presented him with a report, a 3,000-page manifesto on how to consolidate power and instill conservatism in at least every part of the U.S. government. And for a second, you might think, that's sinister. Reagan wouldn't go for that, would he? Possibly. He's one of the good guys, right? No. And Reagan didn't just go for it. He went all in, handing the report to every single person possible and even employing some of the authors of the report at the White House and in the Reagan administration. And when these guys approached Reagan, they were reportedly clear on what they wanted. Abolish the Department of Energy, revoke all executive orders requiring affirmative action for minorities and government or contracting, strip civil agencies of their powers to, quote, make an example of them, strip the EPA of its federal control, reduce the National Security Agency to basically nothing, essentially mean clear house, boost the defense budget, develop a new strategic bomb, increase military spending, crack down on domestic radicals, and downgrade OSHA, which makes sure that you are safe at work in terms of safety guidelines. Apparently, Reagan's transition team director, Edward Meese, was so anxious to get his hands on this freshly new hot doc, and after reading it, he referred to the Heritage Foundation as, quote, a pretty good group of people, end quote. So you can see where this is going. The Washington Post called the report a chest hope of the mainstream right wing. A year later, Reagan is president, and the Heritage Foundation comes to check up on him and gives the guy a grade of a D. He was scoring about 60% with them. Reagan had implemented 60% of more than 2,000 proposals offered to him by the Heritage Foundation, who authored this report. It's still really horrifically frightening, but they said that he was moving in the right direction, but he just needed to do more. That sentiment definitely got noticed by the New York Times with this headline: Heritage Foundation disappointed by Reagan. Later on, having initiated more of the group's work, Reagan cited them as playing a central role in his success for his term and second term. But that report from 1980, published by the Heritage Foundation, has clear and direct ties to something bigger today, known as Project 2025. You see, the name of the report, first published back in '81, is Mandate for Leadership. If you look closely at Project 2025, you'll find the same thing. Mandate for Leadership, the conservative promise. By that logic, they're basically trying to finish what they started under Reagan, except this is on steroids. It's draconian, absolutely nuts, scary as hell. It's worse. See, these things are all connected. This is a headline here by the New York Times. Heritage Foundation disappointed by Reagan. Quote, the Heritage Foundation said today that the first year of the Reagan administration, while heading the country in the proper direction, had not lived up to the expectations of conservatives. Contrast that to the Heritage Foundation under Donald Trump. They said that, yeah, actually, Trump is doing pretty good in successfully restructuring the government. So it's this change, of course, because what has been leading the United States government for years, among all Republican presidents, is groups like the Heritage Foundation, is groups like the Moral Majority, is these conservative groups, these conservative think tank groups whose goal basically is to install a right-wing Christian nationalist government in place. That's what they want. That's the goal. A country that is only safe, effectively, and has rights for white heterosexual men. And part of their goal here, of course, is not just to have that happen, but also to eviscerate the administrative state, which they believe is just too much. Abolish the Department of Energy under Ronald Reagan, they said? Well, under Donald Trump, Secretary Chris Wright has ended essential research studies for the Department of Energy and terminated 24 projects issued by the Office of Clean Energy. They also have eliminated 47 pro-environmental regulations, among other things, effectively crippling the agency. Politico reported last week that the Trump administration will be taking new steps to block wind and solar projects at the Department of Interior. Revoke all executive orders requiring affirmative action for minorities in government or contracting, they said under Reagan. Well, boom, the Trump administration has done that in their war on DEI. No more protections for women, no more protections for minorities, no more protections for anyone because race is too much. Stripping civil agencies of their power to, quote, make an example out of them? Well, that's been happening. Also, stripping the EPA of its federal control? Check, they've done that. We've reported on that here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show as well. Reduce the National Security Agency to basically nothing, meaning clear house, they said under Reagan. Boom. They've done a great job with that as well, because the person leading all intelligence agencies in the United States, the Director of National Intelligence, is a terrorist sympathizer named Tulsi Gabbard. And also, don't worry, NSA will be more aligned with Trump because Elon made that happen. So check, congratulations, thank God for the terrible national security infrastructure that is now in place in the United States because of groups like the Heritage Foundation since the 1980s saying, hey, Reagan, you should really do this. And then, oh, Reagan didn't do it, so let's keep going. They're becoming more and more successful under Trump. Boost the defense budget, increase military spending, check, they've done that as well. Crack down on domestic radicals, check, they've done that with mass deportation. Downgrade OSHA, which essentially makes sure that you are safe at work in terms of safety guidelines at your job. Earlier this year, a Republican congressman introduced legislation to eliminate OSHA. And Trump's new nominee for the agency wants to get rid of heat protections for workers. The Trump administration also last week slashed fines for safety violations by small businesses and other employers, planning to reduce rare workplace inspections, and according to experts, this will lead to more worker injuries, illnesses, and deaths. So congratulations, I hope you have a good time going to work now, knowing that OSHA is getting downgraded. And also, that the new guy who's going to be over OSHA wants to get rid of heat protections and other safety precautions for workers as well. That's what they're doing. It's all about eviscerating the administrative state, getting rid of these unnecessary agencies. It's too unnecessary. The private sector should benefit because that's what conservatives want. The State Department, they said back in the 80s, it was, quote, plagued by institutional and personality difficulties that had become a nagging embarrassment, a problem that the Conservative Foundation said could be eliminated by establishing a, quote, clear and meaningful role for the White House National Security Advisor. Haig shares in criticism, in quotes. Well, what has since then happened? Marco Rubio has helped that agency, and also the super conservative majority on the Supreme Court has helped effectively dismantle the U.S. State Department by allowing thousands of federal workers to be fired, including essential workers. Let's also not forget that Ronald Reagan tried to literally dismantle, get rid of the Department of Education multiple times, but failed. That is becoming more and more successful under this administration, under the Trump administration, where conservatives and the Heritage Foundation want the Department of Education gone. Let's send education back to the stage, which is going to be completely detrimental, completely disastrous. We're going to have a special report on that next week, really just sitting down, finally looking at this and going through what this would mean if this were to completely happen. The goal for conservatives is not to make America beneficial for everyone. It is to make America more restrictive. It is to make America more difficult to access for people who are immigrants, to make America more difficult to access for people who are minorities, for people who are trying. But to make it more frugal, to make it more enticing and aggrandizing for the rich, for the people who can afford that type of lifestyle. That's what they want. You know how Ronald Reagan essentially railed against programs like welfare and everything? Yeah, they wanted to do that as well under Reagan's administration, and they did as well. What has Donald Trump just done to an agency like the, Department of Housing and Urban Development? Oh yeah, we're going to kick a bunch of people off of Section 8. They're going to be hurt by that. Because, of course, the federal government is not there to help you anymore. Conservative ideology is rooted in this belief that we have to have this right-wing Christian nationalist government, and therefore we cannot take care of anyone else. You want a good economy? Get up and go to work, even though we're still not going to do anything to make it easier for you because we're eliminating OSHA. And also we're going to, continue to keep the minimum wage at the way it is. Despite the fact that times are becoming more and more fierce, harder, making more of the population destitute, conservatives do not care about progression because, as I always say on this show, for conservatives, progression is regression. They have no desire to go forward in society. If you're concerned that the United States is starting to look like the Gilded Age again, if you're concerned that the United States is starting to look like the 1800s again, as we're talking about putting children back in factories and eliminating child worker protection laws, getting rid of child labor laws, you're right on. Because that's what's happening in this country. It is their desire to eviscerate any modern progression. Because for them, that scares the hell out of them. That's why they're so anti-Zohran Mamdani in New York. Literally, the things that he's championing is stuff that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have championed back in the 1940s. Why is free healthcare such an authoritarian, autocratic, socialist scheme to destroy people? People don't think people should have free healthcare? Other countries, other developed democracies in the world have universal healthcare. The United States is just a country that thrives and profits off of people's greed. No, let me correct myself. The United States is a country that thrives and profits off of people's deaths, off of people's pain, off of people's destitution in order for that greed to remain consistent for the wealthy. That's what's happening in this country. Yes, we are effectively returning to the Gilded Age. Things are getting worse and worse and worse. Tax cuts for the rich. People who are suffering in this country already, boom, you're going to get hit. We're going to eliminate protections. We're going to take away SNAP benefits to a bunch of people, as well as Medicaid and Medicare. Donald Trump and his administration have succeeded in doing a lot of the things that Reagan could not, or that Reagan could not do far enough. Trump is not running the government. The Heritage Foundation, per Project 2025 and per Project Esther, are. And they are also funded by dangerous billionaires who seek to eviscerate democracy completely because they believe that we should have a dictatorship. People like Curtis Yarvin and Peter Thiel, who also are connected to J.D. Vance, because they both essentially, Peter Thiel, this right-wing eccentric billionaire, funded J.D. Vance's career. This effective nobody who became a politician and then the vice president of the United States. This is where we are here. This is who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. Don't get so stuck on Trump. Do not believe the lie, the delusion that if Donald Trump were to pass away today or tomorrow, or if he were to resign or something, that this would all be over. J.D. Vance becoming the next president of the United States is terrifying as hell. And it should horrify everyone. Because it won't be J.D. Vance leading the government, it'll be Peter Thiel. Someone far more dangerous in terms of the conservative movement. This right-wing, pro-Christian nationalist dictatorial regime that they want to install. This has been in the works for 40 plus years. And they are now succeeding better than they've ever done with these people in office. That's where we are. That's why I wanted to make this video. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. It's not always the people on the front lines. Dig deeper. Have a heart, have a desire to dig deeper, to understand what's going on, to understand who's actually doing what behind the scenes. Also understanding that the story presented to you is not always going to be the full story. Investigative journalism, you got to do. Read longer articles, watch longer videos, study history, and watch what's going on. Because if there's ever too much exposure on one specific story in this country, there is always something more dangerous, more sinister that is going on that they do not want you to know about. And this is one of those stories we got to stay on. I covered it earlier this year, multiple times, because if you just look at it here, it's not really Donald Trump and J.D. Vance that are leading the government. It is these eccentric far-right billionaires who have anti-democratic ideologies, but also groups like the Heritage Foundation who are finally getting their way in monumental achievements in which they are celebrating the President of the United States in doing this stuff that Reagan could not. There's no headlines that the Heritage Foundation is disappointed with Trump like they were with Reagan. They're very proud, in fact. Keep your eyes open, keep your heads up, and stay focused. They want you to be distracted. They want you to think that it's just Trump, but it's also them. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. If you enjoyed this video here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show, please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Of course, you can become a paid subscriber to the Jeremiah Patterson Show on our Substack for just $7.99 a month or $75 a year. As always, please be sure to follow us on Blue Sky, Substack, at tjpsnews. You can shoot me an email, tjpsnews@gmail.com. If you want to support the Jeremiah Patterson Show, as this is independent journalism and we do rely on your donations to continue this crucial work, you can support us by sending a one-time or recurring donation to Cashapp, Venmo, PayPal at tjpsnews. And of course, there's also our GoFundMe for the Jeremiah Patterson Show. So far, $200 has been raised, an incredible achievement. I actually forgot about this GoFundMe. I launched it in the fall of 2024. And so to have, a donation that occurred earlier this week, I'm so incredibly grateful and blessed to still be doing this. And thanks to all of you for supporting my work here as an independent journalist. So again, please be sure to check out those links if you want to support the Jeremiah Patterson Show. I will see you again very soon for another special report that's going to be coming out later today. And then I'll be seeing you back again tomorrow for the pre-recorded TJPS Evening News Show per the news schedule. All right, everyone, stay tuned. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. Be a part of the resistance.